What would you do if you caught your own daughter helping the man she loved sabotage her mother's wheelchair while 200 guests waited nearby to celebrate their engagement? I didn't scream. I didn't grab him. I didn't even let my face reveal what I'd seen. Because sometimes, the worst mistake you can make when someone is setting a trap is letting them know you've discovered it. If you've ever believed that family should be the safest place in the world, hit that like button, subscribe to Ruthless Karma, and listen carefully, because this is the story of the night one man's cruel plan collapsed directly onto him. My name is Arthur Mercer. I'm 66 years old, and for 38 years I worked as a master electrician. That career taught me something important. When a machine fails, you don't immediately assume it's an accident. You inspect the damage. You look for what doesn't belong. And most importantly, you learn to recognize the difference between something that broke and something somebody deliberately made break. 6 weeks before my daughter Emily's wedding, we hosted her engagement party at the Whitmore Hotel. It was supposed to be beautiful. Her fiancé, Grant, came from a wealthy family, and his parents had insisted on making the evening a formal introduction between both families. I paid half the bill, not because I had to, because Emily was my daughter, and after everything my wife Margaret had endured, I wanted her to have one night where she could forget about hospitals, rehabilitation, and pain. 11 months earlier, Margaret had fallen down our back porch steps. 2 shattered vertebrae, partial paralysis, a wheelchair. The custom chair had cost nearly $9,000. But the money wasn't what hurt. Margaret had owned a flower shop for 30 years. She had spent her entire life standing, moving, carrying boxes, arranging bouquets, greeting customers. Now she needed wheels to cross a room. She hated it, not because she was ashamed of the chair, because she missed the woman she'd been before it. That evening she wore a beautiful blue dress. She looked nervous, but happy. I arrived early to check the sound system. The ballroom was mostly empty. Then I heard voices. Quiet voices. The kind people use when they think nobody is listening. I followed the sound toward the head table. And there he was. Grant, crouched beside Margaret's wheelchair, holding a screwdriver. His hand was inside the brake housing. My stomach tightened. Then I saw Emily standing beside him. She was holding a folded napkin in front of them, blocking the view. I froze. Grant whispered something. Emily leaned closer. Then she said 5 words that made my blood run cold. Make sure it happens during the toast. I stepped backward into the shadows. I needed to hear more. I needed to know whether I had misunderstood. I didn't. Grant straightened and smiled. It'll look like an accident, he whispered. And suddenly, the engagement party wasn't a celebration anymore. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. And my wife was supposed to be the victim. But they had made one mistake. They forgot who was watching. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on Grant's hands, the screwdriver, the wheelchair, the tiny metal mechanism that was supposed to keep Margaret safe. I had repaired thousands of machines during my career. I knew what damaged hardware looked like. Grant hadn't been fixing anything. He had been weakening it. Then he noticed me. He slowly turned. Our eyes met. Emily's face went white. Dad. Grant recovered first. He gave me that polished smile I'd seen him use with waiters, hotel employees, and anyone else he considered beneath him. Arthur, he said, you scared us. I looked at the wheelchair. What are you doing? Grant laughed softly. Margaret's wheel has been squeaking. Emily noticed it. I was just taking a look. I crouched beside the chair. Really? Yeah, he held up the screwdriver. I used to fix bikes when I was younger. A lie. A smooth one, but still a lie. I examined the brake housing. The damage was obvious to me. The retaining pin had been shaved down. Not broken. Not worn. Shaved. Someone had deliberately removed just enough material to make the lock hold under light pressure and fail under real weight. The kind of failure that could happen when Margaret leaned forward. The kind that could send her face first onto a hard floor. I looked at Emily. She couldn't meet my eyes. That hurt more than anything Grant had done. Dad, she whispered, please don't make this into something. Something. That word stayed with me. My daughter had just watched someone sabotage her mother's wheelchair, and she called my reaction the problem. I wanted to grab Grant by the collar. I wanted to demand an explanation. I wanted to ask Emily how she could stand there. But anger is loud. Evidence is quiet, and quiet evidence lasts longer. So I smiled. Thanks for looking after your mother. Grant relaxed. Emily exhaled. They thought they'd escaped. They hadn't. I walked away. I found a quiet corner near the kitchen and opened the hotel's security application. The Whitmore had cameras covering the head table. I pulled up the live feed. There they were, Grant with the screwdriver, Emily standing guard. The exact moment they thought nobody was watching. I saved the footage. Then I saved it again. Email. Cloud storage. A backup drive. I wasn't taking chances. Next, I went to the maintenance room. I found a replacement brake housing that matched Margaret's. 11 minutes later, the damaged part was gone. The new mechanism was locked securely into place. I tested it once, twice, 3 times. Then I pushed against the frame with all my strength. It didn't move. Margaret would be safe. But I wasn't finished. I looked down at the sabotaged part in my hand. Then I looked toward the ballroom. Grant had planned a public humiliation. He wanted Margaret to fall in front of 200 people. He wanted everyone watching. So I decided something. If he wanted an audience, I would give him one. But he wasn't going to watch my wife fall. He was going to watch his own plan collapse. I didn't tell Margaret what I'd discovered. That was the hardest part. She was sitting in the hotel lounge, looking through photographs of flowers with Emily's future mother-in-law. She was smiling. Actually smiling. I couldn't destroy that moment before I knew exactly how everything would unfold. So I kept the secret. When Margaret arrived in the ballroom, I helped her into the wheelchair. She looked beautiful. She touched my hand. Arthur, she whispered. Thank you. For what? For making tonight feel normal. I swallowed. Tonight is going to be wonderful, and I meant it, just not for everyone. I checked the new brake mechanism while pretending to adjust her position. It clicked firmly into place. Safe, I looked across the ballroom. Grant was greeting guests. Emily stood beside him. For a moment, she glanced toward her mother. There was something strange in her expression. Not guilt. Anticipation that frightened me more. Then I noticed Grant's cousin, Derek. He leaned toward Grant and whispered something. Grant laughed. Derek glanced at Margaret, then quickly looked away. So Grant wasn't the only person who knew. The room filled. Nearly 200 guests. Music played. Waiters carried champagne. The engagement cake stood beneath the lights. Everything looked perfect, which made what was coming even darker. The speeches began. Grant's father spoke first. Then, Emily's mother was thanked for being an inspiration. Margaret smiled politely. I watched Grant. He was waiting. His fingers tapped against his glass. His eyes kept drifting toward the platform. Then the coordinator announced him. Grant stood. He adjusted his jacket and walked toward the microphone. As he passed the row of folding chairs, he reached toward one. It was a habit. I'd noticed it at previous events. Whenever Grant walked onto a stage, he steadied himself by grabbing the nearest chair. Tonight, the nearest chair was the one I'd chosen. The sabotaged mechanism was hidden inside its brace. Grant placed his hand on the back. He leaned, and the chair gave way. Crack. The sound cut through the ballroom. Grant's body lurched forward. His shoulder slammed into the edge of the dessert table. The engagement cake slid sideways, then crashed onto the floor. Frosting exploded across the white carpet. The microphone hit the ground with a horrible burst of feedback. Grant landed flat on his back. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Someone screamed. His mother shouted his name. Waiters rushed forward. Guests stood. Emily tried to move quickly and caught her heel in her dress. She fell onto one knee, but I barely noticed. Because Margaret was staring at me. She had no idea. She thought it had been an accident. I walked toward the sound table. The coordinator looked confused. I calmly inserted a flash drive into the laptop. The engagement slideshow disappeared. The screen went black. Then the footage appeared. Grant, the screwdriver. Margaret's wheelchair. Emily standing beside him. The room became silent. Then Emily's voice filled the ballroom. Make sure it happens during the toast. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened. I watched the color drain from her face. The footage continued, Grant explaining exactly how the wheelchair would fail, how everyone would rush to help, how Margaret would be humiliated, and why they wanted it to happen. I picked up the fallen microphone. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I found this an hour ago, I said. Every face turned toward me. This wasn't an accident. And then I looked directly at Grant. It was a plan. Nobody spoke. Not immediately. The screen kept playing. Grant's face appeared again, his screwdriver moving inside Margaret's wheelchair. Then Emily, my daughter, standing beside him, watching, helping. Margaret looked at her. Emily? Her voice was barely audible. My daughter opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Grant tried first. This is manipulated. I almost laughed. Almost manipulated? I pointed at the screen. You're standing right there. That doesn't prove what you think it proves. I looked at him. You told her exactly when the chair would fail. Silence. Grant looked toward Emily. Emily looked toward the floor. And suddenly, the room understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Grant's mother stepped forward. Preston, then she stopped herself. Wrong name. Wrong moment. She covered her mouth. Grant's father stared at his son like he was seeing a stranger. Derek was standing near the bar. His face had turned pale. I noticed. So did everyone else. Margaret finally spoke. Why? That one word carried more pain than any scream could have. Grant looked at her. His confidence disappeared. We didn't mean to hurt you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. You planned to make my wheelchair fail. He said nothing. You wanted me to fall. Still nothing. You wanted everyone to watch. His silence answered for him. Margaret turned toward Emily. That was the moment I will never forget. Not because she screamed. She didn't. She simply asked, "Why did you help him?" Emily broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I was scared. Of what? Emily looked at Grant. Then at me. He said you were ruining everything. My jaw tightened. Grant immediately shook his head. She misunderstood. No, I said. She understood perfectly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out another drive. This contains the original footage. Then I looked around the room. Anyone who wants to know exactly what happened can stay. Nobody left. That mattered. They wanted the truth. So I gave it to them. The footage showed Grant discussing Margaret's disability. He mocked her. He called the wheelchair embarrassing. He said Emily's wedding would look better without that situation dominating the room. Then came the part that made Margaret close her eyes. Grant said he wanted everyone to see her fall. Not because he wanted to hurt her physically. Because he wanted to humiliate her. He wanted people to pity the family. He wanted attention directed away from another problem. Money. I didn't know the full story yet. But I knew there was one. Grant had been hiding something. And when the truth came out, the wheelchair sabotage would look like only the first piece of a much larger betrayal. That night, the engagement party ended without a toast. There was no celebration. No photographs. No happy speeches. Just an ambulance checking Grant's shoulder and guests quietly leaving. Emily didn't speak to me for 19 days. When she finally called, I expected an apology. Instead, her first words were, "How could you set us up like that?" I closed my eyes. Then I answered calmly. "I didn't set you up, Emily." I paused. "I simply stopped you from setting your mother up. The story should have ended at the hotel. It didn't. Because once the family stopped protecting Grant, the truth began coming apart. Emily's attorney started reviewing their finances. At first they found something strange, then something worse, then something devastating. Grant had been using Emily's trust fund as collateral. For 2 years, he had opened a private line of credit under her name. Emily knew about some investments. She didn't know the full terms. Grant had convinced her that everything was stable. It wasn't. Several real estate investments had already collapsed. He was drowning in debt, and he needed Emily to rescue him. The timing suddenly made sense. He was 3 weeks away from asking Emily to co-sign another loan, a loan that would have left her personally responsible for more than $400,000. But there was a problem. Margaret. Margaret had always been suspicious of Grant. She never trusted his constant talk about investments. She had warned Emily. Grant knew it. He believed Margaret was turning Emily against him. So he needed Margaret discredited, humiliated, made to look unstable. He wanted the family to think Margaret's accident was another embarrassing problem. And if she fell in front of 200 people, even better. People would talk about her wheelchair, not his debts. That was the real plan. The wheelchair wasn't just a weapon. It was a distraction. Grant wasn't simply cruel. He was desperate. And desperate people sometimes become dangerous when they believe their future is collapsing. 11 days after the lawyer uncovered everything, Emily ended the engagement. Grant begged, then threatened, then blamed everyone else. Her father, her mother, her friends, even his own parents. But nobody believed him anymore. The evidence was too strong. His parents quietly separated themselves from his financial mess. Investors began asking questions. Then lawsuits appeared. Within 4 months, Grant had moved to another state. He left behind angry investors, unpaid debts, and a reputation he couldn't repair. But there was one person who came to my house before disappearing. Derek, Grant's cousin. He arrived sober. No jokes, no excuses. He sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug. I knew, he said. I stared at him. Knew what? The plan. My stomach tightened. He told me about the wheelchair. Derek looked down. He called it a joke. I didn't respond. He said it would put you in your place. That sentence stayed with me. Derek admitted he had known before the party. He had stayed silent. Until he saw the footage. Until he heard Margaret's name spoken aloud. Until he realized how close Grant had come to seriously hurting her. Then Derek gave a statement to Emily's lawyer. It didn't erase his silence, but at least he finally told the truth. Months later, Emily came to my house. She stood outside the front door for almost a minute before knocking. When I opened it, she was crying. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't know what to say. So I let her come inside. She sat at the kitchen table. And for the first time, she told me everything. Not excuses, not explanations, the truth. And sometimes, truth doesn't repair a family immediately. Sometimes it only gives you the first piece you need to start rebuilding one. Margaret's recovery surprised everyone, even her doctors. 6 months after the engagement party, Emily organized a small dinner. No hotel ballroom, no photographers, no wealthy parents, no speeches, just family. The purpose was simple. Emily wanted to apologize to her mother. I wasn't sure Margaret would go, but she did. We arrived at the restaurant together. Margaret used her wheelchair. She wore a simple dress. She looked nervous. Then something happened that I hadn't expected. She stood. Slowly, she took her cane. And she walked. 1 step. Then another. Across the restaurant. Her chair remained behind. Nobody spoke. Emily covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. Margaret reached her. Emily stood. They hugged. And my daughter cried like she hadn't cried since she was a child. Not because she was embarrassed, not because anyone was watching. Because she finally understood what she had almost done. She had nearly helped destroy the woman who had spent her entire life protecting her. Margaret held her. "You made a terrible choice," she whispered. Emily nodded. "I know. But you're here now." Emily sobbed harder. "I don't deserve you." Margaret shook her head. "No." She touched her daughter's face. "You don't get to decide whether you deserve forgiveness." Emily looked confused. "Then who does?" Margaret smiled sadly. "The person you hurt. That was the beginning. Not the end. The beginning. Emily and I didn't suddenly become close again. Trust doesn't return because someone says sorry. Trust returns through repetition, through small actions, through showing up. She called every Sunday. She stopped making excuses. She finished the degree she'd abandoned for the wedding. She helped Margaret with appointments. She never again treated her mother's disability as something embarrassing. And Margaret started tending the flower beds again. At first, only a few minutes. Then 10. Then 20. Eventually, she spent an entire afternoon outside. The same woman who once hated needing help was planting flowers again. I would stand at the kitchen window and watch her. Sometimes she'd catch me staring. "What?" she'd ask. "Nothing." "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Watching me like I'm going to disappear." I'd smile. "Can't help it." She'd roll her eyes. Then she'd laugh. That laugh became my favorite sound in the world, because the accident had taken so much from her. Her independence, her confidence, her certainty. But it hadn't taken everything, and neither had Grant. One evening, Margaret and I walked slowly along the sidewalk. Her hand rested on my arm. She no longer needed the walker. She still moved carefully. But she was moving. All those months earlier, Grant had wanted 200 people to watch her fall. Instead, they eventually watched her rise. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. just one step at a time. And somehow, that was more powerful than anything I could have planned. People sometimes ask me whether I regret what happened to Grant. The cake, the fall, the humiliation, the collapse of his engagement, the financial disaster, the lawsuits, the life he had carefully constructed falling apart. My answer is always the same. No, because I didn't create his downfall. I didn't sabotage his life. I didn't expose a lie he hadn't already told. I didn't invent his debts. I didn't force him to manipulate Emily. And I certainly didn't put that screwdriver into my wife's wheelchair. Grant built his own trap. I simply refused to let it close around Margaret. That's the difference. Revenge isn't always about hurting someone. Sometimes it's about stepping aside and allowing the truth to reach the person who created it. Grant wanted Margaret to fall in front of everyone. Instead, his own plan exposed him. He wanted humiliation. He got accountability. He wanted sympathy. He lost credibility. He wanted Emily tied to his financial problems. She walked away. And most importantly, he wanted my wife to believe she was weak. She proved him wrong. Today, Margaret and I still live in the same house. The back porch is still there. The same steps. The same flower beds. But we don't look at those steps the same way anymore. They remind us that life can change in one terrible second, and that the people standing beside you during that moment matter more than anyone else. Emily calls every Sunday. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. Last month, she asked Margaret if they could go dress shopping together. No wedding, no event, no audience, just mother and daughter. Margaret agreed. After they left, I stood in the doorway and watched them walk toward the car. Emily opened the passenger door. Margaret smiled. Then she paused. She looked back at me. "Don't worry," she called. I laughed. "I'm not." And for once, I wasn't. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without allowing the memory to control your future. I still remember Grant's hand inside that wheelchair. I still remember Emily standing beside him. I still remember Margaret's face when she realized the truth. But I also remember her walking across that restaurant. One step, then another. And I remember thinking something my father once taught me. If you discover a wire has already been cut, don't pretend you didn't see it. Don't tape it together and hope nobody gets hurt. Find out who cut it. Protect the innocent. And let the person who created the danger face the consequences. Because sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destroying someone. It's simply making sure their own choices finally belong to them. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button. Subscribe to Dad's Cold Revenge. And tell me in the comments, would you have exposed them immediately? Or would you have waited for the truth to reveal itself? And remember, karma doesn't always knock. Sometimes, you hear the trap snap first.